Hi, and welcome to the Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast presented by Wolf Precision Incorporated, where we learn about and share long range shooting and custom rifle building. I am your host, Jamie Dotson, and welcome to the show. Hi, and welcome to episode 132 of Wolf Precision's Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast. I am your host, Jamie Dotson, and welcome to the show. And today we have joining us again is Richard. We're going to be doing some chit-chatting. So say hi, Richard.
Hi, Richard.
And then today we're going to be discussing big game cartridges and more importantly, elk cartridges. Well, we have a video we just worked on. We're going to be putting out on YouTube. We're going to be covering a lot of this conversation because it's common here at the shooting school and multiple questions that we've received, feedback from guides, and just a video we watched last night that just really got me spinning on this. So it's a conversation I'm eager to get talking about here. So without further ado, we're going to get started. It's going to be a good one. If you're a hunter, you should listen to this one. Here we go. Before we get started, I do want to say a quick thanks to Krieger Barrels. They make fine cut rifle barrels. They're made out of the great state of Wisconsin. It's what we use in all of our match rifles here, what I would really consider the best in the country. They have a new program called Krieger Direct where you can purchase your barrel and have it in as little as 2 to 3 business days. So if you want the best and you need it now, stop over to KriegerDirect.com. That's KriegerDirect.com. We'd also like to thank TriggerTech. TriggerTech is the maker of fine world-class triggers. They are in all of our custom rifles for a reason. Easy to adjust, easy to install, one screw to adjust the pull weight, and a safe trigger. So if you want to upgrade your rifle, custom or otherwise, and you'd like to do it with a trigger, stop over to triggertech.com. That's triggertech.com today. All right, so this ought to be a good podcast. I had watched a YouTube video last night, and it just popped up, you know how it does, and it talked about elk cartridges and the perfect elk cartridge and evaluating elk cartridges and by a writer named Ron. But he read this list, and when I was watching it, you know, when you combine this with multiple customers that have called in and asked questions on this, it's build season. You know, everybody's getting their rifles put together for next year. And the conversations that we have had over and over and over again with the feedback that the customers get, what we've learned here at the school, and then just watching this video last night, it was just amazing. Like, I'm just sitting there gritting my teeth on multiple levels to talk about this. So we're going to talk about elk cartridges and magnums and the pros and cons and who should use them and who shouldn't. And not demonizing magnums for hunting, but there are lots of considerations, so this ought to be a good one. Richard didn't see the video, so I'm throwing him under the bus here right out of the gate, but he's been with the school long enough and he's watched enough shooters with magnums to know what we're going to talk about. And there's a difference between those that get to spend a lot of time with people suffering the consequences. So let's just start here. Magnums at the shooting school. So let's set a baseline on those that have done great shooting them and those that have suffered massive consequences. And we're talking heavier rifles in a lot of these cases too. So just give me your general input on magnums with the average shooter and just some of the things that they're going to struggle with and some of the things you found some people actually do well with.
I think the one comment that immediately comes to mind is that most people don't shoot magnums as well as they think they do. That's the first one. So a guy that has potential to shoot nice itty-bitty groups with a, dare I say it, 2.2 Creedmoor, 223, 6.5, is probably sometimes struggling to keep it within 1.5 inches with a magnum. And we've seen everything up to and including the guy who gets all set up all the way through his fundamentals, and then right before the trigger lets go, he closes his eyes. We've seen that at the school. And so the magnumitis thing, I mean, we were fortunate enough to shoot, what was that, 375 Chaytek when we were down in Georgia. One of the shooters on the line brought along a special rifle that he had. And I can shoot that. I don't get great pleasure out of shooting the big cartridges. I prefer to shoot something smaller, but that's just me. But I think that a lot of people, if you don't spend a lot of time shooting and then you start getting behind the gun and shooting some magnum caliber, maybe you only do it once a year, I think that can be troublesome for people's shooting skills, and it puts a lot of pressure on you. Now, the flip side of that is that one of our customers picked up a 300 Win Mag from us recently, and he'd been shooting 300 Win Mag, he told me, since he was like a youth, I think. And he went through a couple of hundred rounds or more that day, and he was bang on target with every single shot. I mean, the wind was playing havoc with him a little bit, but I mean, he could shoot. You could put him behind anything and he would have shot it well because he was just well tuned to shooting magnums. And so I think that it comes down to the amount of experience that people have. I mean, if you're that guy that has your 300 Win Mag and you pick it up to ready to go out for deer season, you know, you only shoot it maybe once a year and put 15, 20 rounds through it, you're going to have a harder time, I think, with the more powerful cartridges than you would if you just, you know, regularly shot, you know, your AR, light AR with a 223, and then you picked up, you know, a 6.5 Creedmoor. You're going to shoot that better. This is just my personal opinion. I mean, talking to a guy, me, I shoot 223 and 243 and a bit of handgun, you know. So from my perspective, that's what that's my personal experience. And then that's also what I've seen at the shooting school. I mean, I always say this, but I hark back to the days when you used to have 223s on the line because I think that brought out the best in people's fundamentals. So it was a relatively light rifle, shooting a light cartridge, and people could focus on fundamentals rather than being afraid of the massive recoil that might be coming in the split second.
Yeah, this brings up multiple conversations. So if you're a hunter, really, I think there's going to be a lot of things we're going to talk about to maybe take into consideration when you're selecting these cartridges and just get a different point of view of it. You know, ours might not be right. You might agree or disagree. But the conversation was, I watched a writer who's been in the industry a long time talking about these lists of people have made up for the perfect elk cartridge, right? And he printed off 3 lists, one from a writer friend, his personal one, and then some from another forum. That's actually a pretty popular forum that a gentleman had wrote an article for. And he had gone over the list, ridiculing it and gawking at some of the caliber selections. And first of all, I want to go back to writers, and maybe I'll make some of them mad, maybe I won't. But writers, especially those in our industry, are the car salesmen for the firearms industry. Most don't shoot like you think they do. Most survive off of the handouts from the industry. And every article that you've read, you'll never, ever, ever, you pull out the last 20 years of magazines, you will not find a bad review.
Yeah, you're probably right. It was funny because I was just mentioning to Jamie this morning that I was watching one of the channels that I like to watch, and a guy was testing a 308 AR rifle, and his first groups out of the gun were not spectacular by anybody's standards. And one of his first comments was, you know, hey guys, this is what you have to expect out of this kind of a rifle. You know, don't think it's going to shoot itty bitty groups all the time, because it won't. And so from my opinion, there you've got someone who's a little bit more feet on the ground, who's a little bit more realistic in his expectations, and knows from his experience, he seems to shoot a lot, that, you know, you don't get rifles that shoot itty bitty groups all the time very often unless you buy something special. And I think that you do read the magazines. I mean, I get the NRA magazine every gun they test, it's an inch, or it's a half an inch, or it's 3/4 of an inch. And we just know that, you know, that rarely happens because we see these guns come through the school and we see 160 rounds going through the guns and we see what people shoot. Now, of course, it's always a combination between the shooter skills and the actual firearm capabilities. And most people who are into shooting know that you buy performance and then you hope that you can live up to it. So similarly, there would be, I would love to have a Ferrari and get it on a racetrack, but I know at the end of the day, I probably can't wring everything out of a Ferrari on a racetrack because I just don't have that skill set. Now, I can train for that skill set, same as I can for shooting, but I know that I don't have it immediately. It's not a part of my DNA.
Well, rarely are people, generally speaking, I mean, we all work. Everybody has jobs and careers, and a lot of people that go on a lot of these hunts work exceptional hours. So, I mean, if you're going on a big dollar elk hunt, guided even, they're big investments. You're probably a professional of some kind. You're probably working a lot of overtime to pay for it. And so the time you get to spend in the field and practice and shoot and prepare for it even, you know, life has a way to get in the way of everything. So most people, they don't get the practicing and the shooting in. So that's going to come back to another conversation here in a minute. But the list had some calibers on there. So we had got a bunch of questions about elk cartridges, and a lot of our guys do go out and hunt elk, and I've got the opportunity to go once. I plan on going again here shortly. And we get calls all the time like, what is our opinion on elk cartridges? And I'm just going to go over just calibers in general here at the school and what I think people should take into consideration. But leading up to the question is he scoffed at this guy's list. I mean, he basically ridiculed him. And I have to say that a lot of these guys that are in the industry as far as writers go, even the guys that write on these hunts, I mean, I can tell you in the 80s of all the horror stories of guys having the ram tied to the bumper of their pickup truck. So it was filmed. You couldn't see the rope on the ram or whatever it was on a game ranch, and they shot it with a bow and made a big scene about it. Elk have been shot that way. They're so tame that you could probably walk up and hand feed them. I mean, everything that you see in the media as far as the writers go and some of the shows that you watch, it's Hollywood almost in our industry, and it's made for TV. Not everybody goes out and shoots a monster bull every time they go on the field. So for us in the real world, having a nice 8-point that might be a once-in-a-decade thing for a white-tailed deer. And yet these guys are going out and shooting Boone and Crockett literally their second day out every time on TV. And so we know that there's a little bit of exaggeration. In some cases, like we know of a famous rock star that got in trouble because he had harvested more than one and more than once. That's in our outdoor industry that, he was under pressure to make the shots. He was under pressure to get the film and technically broke some rules trying to get the extra footage and the extra shooting that they needed to make the show. So when he brought up this guy's list that wrote the other article, the guy had on there 6.5 Creedmoor, and he really scoffed at that and was like, well, this would not make my list. And he had on there the 243, and he really scoffed at that and said, this isn't on my list. And everything that he was listing was these big magnums and, of course, the new magnums that are coming out all the time. But I thought, boy, that's disingenuous. And, his comment was, well, the reason we pick these big magnums up is because if it's less than a perfect shot, there's a good chance that they'll still kill the animal. And we hear this with guides telling guys going out on hunting trips that they want a minimum caliber just in case it's a bad shot. And my God, you're almost guaranteeing in some ways it's going to be a bad shot. I mean, if you got a bigger caliber and you can shoot well, and then the pressure's on in a real-world hunting scenario in a less than stable position and a gun that you can't shoot and don't like to.
And big recoil that doesn't land the scope back on the target after you've pulled the trigger.
Oh, big time. Yeah. And I'm going to come back to cartridges. So when I went on elk hunt, I had a 264 Win Mag, and I took it in a heavier rifle and unbraked, no suppressor, and I wanted to be able to spot my own shots. A lot of people took the rifle as, why did you build a heavier? Mine weighed 12 pounds, and the reason I built the weight up is to get the recoil down without the muzzle brake, right? But we had other people in camp that had big magnums, and I really got some grief in camp. Like, one guy was actually a little pissed that he was going to have to chase my elk. And, they didn't know me or who I was or, how much I trained. Like, I trained with that rifle all summer long. I actually shot it in some matches just to get enough rounds down to feel comfortable out to 500 yards with it on elk. But the reason I share the story is like Richard said, like, when they got a chance to shoot their elk, right, 300 Weatherby, 300 Ultra Mags, all these big magnums. I was watching the one guy close his eyes every time he was pulling the trigger practicing. The other guy, think about what happens when he pulls the trigger. He pulls the trigger, the gun recoils up, points 2 miles to the left when it comes back down. Elk run everywhere. First question out of his mouth is,
which one did I shoot at?
Yeah. Did I hit it?
I hit it?
Yeah. Where are they at? Which one is it? Because elk are everywhere. So right out of the gate, your mindset is panic mode. As soon as you pull the trigger, you're trying to find out, did I hit it? Where did it go? And the reason I built my rifle the way that I did is I actually watched the bullet rise up, fall down, hit the animal. I worked the bolt looking at the animal. And so I built my rifle specifically so I could spot my own shots, and I could practice and learn it and master it. And when the scenario is there, I knew I hit the elk. I wasn't in panic mode. I was still looking at it, and so there's that whole other mindset to it. But what I want to talk about here is when you're talking about big game hunting cartridges and just how much the industry has changed and has gone into the sales pitchy thing for the next greatest cartridges, like the 7 PRC and 300 PRC that's coming out. Right, you'll see 500 articles. There'll be a big release at SHOT Show. Everybody will be spending money for new rifles, new dies, extra for brass if you can find it, new loading data, new loading books. It's a monster that keeps feeding itself by regenerating the same thing over and over in a slightly different format.
So it's fun to go buy new stuff, right, and develop a new load. We're getting a little off tangent here, I think. But I also think that if you talk to people that are only shoot big game, so if you talk to some of the subsistence hunters in the Northwest, for instance, like in Alaska, they're probably still shooting, what is that, 6.5 by 55, the Swedish round, right? And that's been doing a phenomenal job for, I don't even know how many years. It's more than 50 years.
Yep.
So you get to the point, I think, where sometimes you're just doing it because you've got the choices, right? So you're picking around because it's what you're reading about. And personally, I think that we need to set our own limits depending on our accuracy standards. So if you can go out and hit a plate first shot in any wind condition that's out there at 400, 500, 600 yards, then you're probably able to take that hunting. For me, I'm a little bit more realistic. Obviously, you know, shooting a deer here and there in Pennsylvania, you're lucky if you get a 200-yard shot. So, you know, you don't need a hammer for that. You know, you can be a little bit more realistic. But I think that firstly, we all take in a lot of information that we see on the internet, right? And we watch YouTube videos of people shooting elk at 750 yards. I don't think I would do that. I've got a fair amount of shooting under my belt. I'm not a bad shooter, right, Jamie? I'm okay. I'm okay, right?
Right?
But I wouldn't do that. I mean, I can shoot out to 700 yards, no problem at all. But I don't think I would shoot an animal at that distance. And if I did, I would choose a comfortable, heavier caliber, and I would be ready to put a second round in it if I needed to. So I would want a rifle that settled nicely back into the target area, and I could, you know, I would be ready with another round just in case I needed to do that. And I think we need to be ethical hunters as well. We need to pick something that we can shoot well, right? So it's a combination of, is it hard enough hitting? Did I pick the right bullet? And really comes down to, am I really accurate enough in any condition? If it's raining, if it's cold, if it's windy, if it's whatever, if I've been laying in snow for an hour, can I still make that shot, or should I not make that shot?
Right. I watched that video and it bothered me so much last night.
You're a little talked.
Yeah. So we had customers call in this year already saying that the guides have refused to take them unless they took a 300 Weatherby or a minimum of 300 Ultra Mag. And, you know, my response to that is I would rather have someone with a 6.5 or a 270 or 30-06 or 300 Win Mag, or there's a million other calibers that when they lay on a rifle, they're putting it where it's supposed to go and they know their limits every single time, over mandating a caliber to a client who's going to buy a lightweight rifle who's not going to learn to shoot it well. So my response to the clients was, look, you have a 6.5 Creedmoor, you're a hammer with it. Right? You know your limits. You're probably a more skilled shooter than most hunters going out. Is you need to remind the guide who wrote the check, and you'll stay within your limits. Put me on the animal and I'll kill him. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of us have been shooting 308 for more than 20 years. That's a good cartridge.
Yeah.
Right?
And yet it got downplayed that, you know, well, I would put that on my list. And I'm like, oh my God, 308s are incredible, especially when you can shoot a little bit heavier bullet or younger shooters. There's just so many cartridges that he scoffed at that wouldn't be on his list. And so I just want to put this out there that I'm going to try to rate cartridges. And so I was thinking about how I wanted to rate them. And so I've got this scoring thing in mind. And I'm just going to give you a little brief thing of what I'm going to do. I'm going to rate cartridges based off the things that are important for you to know and give it a number, like for big game, small game, medium game. The distance, you know, the energy needed, the distance in which the rifle should be capable to produce that energy, the shootability, you know, how much recoil, how much little or extra weight should be added. Are you shooting suppressed or unsuppressed? Are you shooting solids or are you shooting expandables? Are you shooting cupped and bonded with a lead core? Are you shooting like a cutting edge bullet? You know, the recoil, the accuracy, the availability of the ammunition commercially, like 300 Win Mag, you could go to Alaskan Walmart and you're going to find that on the shelf.
And probably 30-06 as well, right?
30-06, that's right. So when you travel,
solid carbon.
You got to give it a number. Is it commercially available? Is it ridiculously priced? Like you're going to pay $120 for 20 rounds. You know, that stuff's out there. So you got to put scores on it for that. The potential accuracy. The rifles that are legendary in their ability not just to be friendly to shoot, but really set world records in 1,000-yard bench rest. You know, there's numbers out there. So we're going to put a number, a finished number, and scale them from 1 to 10 or 1 to 7 on all of these individual categories and start taking out calibers like the 243 and the 6.5 Creed and really give it a real-world number as a shooter. Let's consider it like a shooter's number or a hunter's number. And that way you can really compare the pros and cons when you start talking, because there are pros and cons to both.
can you also consider the distance to target as well? So for me, I don't think I would probably shoot a big animal beyond 400 yards. Mm-hmm. That's just who I am, right? I want it to fall down pretty quick. So if you've got someone like me who wants to stay inside 400 yards in any condition, that's a kind of different conversation than the guy that wants to stretch it to 600 yards.
Right.
Because a lot of some of these cartridges, they do start to lose a lot more energy once you go beyond 400.
Especially your big 30s. So you take a 300 Win Mag shooting a 220 grain or 200 grain bullet, although it has a higher BC, it's starting a lot slower. And at distance, all of these cartridges, they lose speed. And, I spent some time with one of the lead ballisticians with the FBI. Got a chance to talk with him over lunch. We talked a lot. I have a law enforcement background. He had a law enforcement, and he had talked about the devastating effects of cavitation and how people got it wrong. Like, you want high speed. If the bullet slows down too much, it gets out of its expanding zone. So if you look at Hornady's website, they'll tell you, this is the minimum velocity you need for this bullet to work. It might be 1,700 feet per second. Well, that's 600 yards. You're taking an 900 yard shot. You're basically punching them with an arrow. And cavitation, like he was telling me that they took a Texas heart shot on a white-tailed deer with a very high-speed cartridge. And although the bullet would kill him for sure, the cavitation effect of that high-speed bullet broke the deer's hips and back because of that explosion that happens of energy inside. And so, they discount all of these cartridges that are super high speed, like the 243 and even like the 22 Creed and all these other cartridges that are capable of taking medium to big game in reasonable distances. But a lot of their killing strength is the cavitation that's going to happen with these long, heavy bullets for caliber. You're talking 1.5-inch bullets, even in a 243, or you're over an inch bullet for a 22 Creed shooting an 80 or 90 grain bullet, and especially if you go solid. That cavitation energy can't be discounted. It kills. It destroys organs. And so he talked a lot about there's other ways to do this. And so what I was thinking of, like, putting a number from 1 to 7 in each of these categories, and in the end having a total, which would be our score, what we give it. And I picked 1 to 7 because I think 700 yards, in my mind as shooters, we train to 700, we apply skill set beyond there to score hits, right? And so our shooting school is the shooting portion of it. We have 1,000-yard targets, but the core of the training is out to 700 because I think that's where it's close enough that the wind and environments, and it's close enough that you can read that stuff.
Right, you can manage it.
You can, yeah.
Yes.
But beyond there, we don't have any senses out there
right.
that can feel the wind and give all these shifts and variables that happen. And so the reason I chose 1 to 7 is it's 1 to 700 yards too.
Yeah.
And
well,
so
also with the shooting school, we have to be a little careful there because we get some people who've turned up and they've never really shot rifle before.
Yeah.
So you can't, spend all day at over 1,000 yards because you'll just get frustrated shooters.
Well, that you don't learn anything at
Right.
1,000. You're just a practical application for hits.
Yeah.
And so we put some fun stuff up at 1,000, and most guys are really successful. But the art of learning to shoot is 700 and in.
Right. Yeah, 500 to 700, you've got to have solid fundamentals to do it consistently.
You do. Like, we've had lots of customers come through, and if you put them on a 700-yard first-round shot, if they're not really tuned up with their rifle, they know it like the back of their hand, they got all the environments right.
Yeah, they're missing it by 3 feet.
It's hard to hit.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so same thing with big game. So I thought all the categories we're going to come up with, we're going to give it a 1 to 7, not a 1 to 10, and that's because that 100 to 700 yards, like what would be the limit that we would look at with this cartridge? So not to make this too long, this is sort of a preempt of some of the calibers that we're going to do some YouTube videos on and talk a lot about, because I feel there's a big disservice. Like, I have a friend down in Virginia that his daughter's killed multiple really big black bears with 223s. My grandfather shot a 22 Hornet and 222 and used that for his deer rifle for decades. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of elk that have been harvested with a 243. I know of guys who have shot them with 22 250s, head and neck shots, 200 yards and in, shooting cows for food. So when the sales pitch turns into scoffing at all these great cartridges that are more than capable within their limits, especially when you start talking about younger shooters and new shooters that don't have the skill set or the wherewithal to get the shit kicked out of them shooting these big cartridges in light rifles, mind you.
Yep.
I really think that's a disservice to a lot of the hunters and shooters, especially the new guys coming into the market.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many variables that come to play, But I think there are a lot of variables that we can control if we're realistic to ourselves and our skill set, no matter what it is. If you're a beginner or you're a seasoned hunter, I think that eventually you have to boil it down to, what's the shot I'm willing to take for an ethical shot? And what's that scenario look like? And can I hold myself to those parameters when I get that animal of the lifetime in front of me?
Know your limits.
Yeah.
You have to.
You have to.
Yeah. And I mean, that's an ethical thing, right?
But also you have to be ready for that follow-up shot
You
as
do.
well. And having a rifle that can stay relatively on target, if you like, so you can put another round into it if you need to. I personally think that's pretty important.
Yeah, and knowing your rifle like the back of your hand. Like when I went out, my goal was to keep the elk within 500 yards, but I had perfect conditions, the elk was standing broadside, I could get prone. I mean, all the start, there was not a breath of wind. I mean, it was just, you couldn't, and it was 645. And so I've shot the rifle out to 1,000. Actually, I shot woodchucks out to 1,200 yards with it. So I knew the rifle.
So you had decent confidence.
Yeah, knew I could hit him. It's just that I wanted to keep the shot within reasonable distance with a really tough bullet that I knew I could kill it, right?
Right.
And I shot it the first time. It stayed with the cows, ran 150 yards, shot it the second time. And then we just left it lay down and we were coming back to get it in the morning because it was dark. But, the getting pushed into these big magnums, I mean, I can shoot a 300 Win Mag and I've owned them, but I don't enjoy shooting. Like the one guy was shooting a 300 Remington Ultra Mag and a hunting weight rifle. Now, my rifle weighed 12 pounds, mind you. But I was watching him shoot this thing, and he was closing his eyes. Now, he'd never been to my school, and he was like, oh, man, you got to work yourself up to shoot this thing. It kicks the shit out of you. He said, you should try it. I'm like, I don't think so.
Yeah, I wouldn't either.
No, I mean, I'm like, that doesn't look like fun. And you force a new shooter to adopt these big cartridges because if it's a bad shot, they want you to still kill it. It's just the mindset is just totally asinine.
I think it's probably better for someone to say to the guide, you need to get me within, 300 yards.
Yeah.
And then 300 yards, if you can hit 6-inch circle, 300 yards laying in the mud, you're good to go.
And don't feel the peer pressure that when you watch these guys that are pushing the information, I don't think they have bad will. I think it's just embedded to them that, every other writer and person out there is watching their review and they all have to agree. And they all fall into that same category of big calibers. But stay in your lane, know your limits, and you will be happier. You'll train more. If you can shoot a Magnum, that's great. But if you have to shoot a smaller caliber, then you know your limits. You'll set your limits. But train well. And my God, I mean, when I was a kid, I never shot a deer over 150 yards. I mean,
well, that's also a Pennsylvania thing.
It's a Pennsylvania thing, yeah. But you can always get closer. Like they shoot elk with bows all the time.
Yeah, that always impresses me, and I've been following a certain YouTuber with traditional archery recently, and watching him both fail and succeed. I watched a video of him recently with going out with a flintlock, and he missed, and then he clarified that he'd missed. There was no blood anywhere, and went after another one, and he literally laid in the snow for an hour until it was the right condition. Then pulled the trigger, and it was probably a 50-yard shot with the flintlock. And as soon as he did that, he immediately had to light a fire and warm himself up because he's like, I'm almost hypothermic.
That's hilarious.
So, I mean, that's someone who said, you know what, maybe I pushed it too far on that first shot. Now I'm going to bring it back and make sure I get the hit that I need. And that's knowing your limits, right?
So what we're going to do here, and this is not going to be a podcast, this is going to be some video work we'll do, and we'll probably go to the range and do some testing as well, is we're going to start doing some video reviews on the cartridges, talk about the pros and cons to them, and talk about all the different aspects of considering it, and then the limits that we think that's suitable and energy. And then we're going to give each cartridge a score. And, it's going to start with like the 300 Win Mag, the 6.5 Creed, the 243, and really give an honest number. And then I think my goal is at the end is look at when you take all the parameters in from the shooter as well as the bullet availability as well as the limits. I think you would be surprised when you have the magnums and all these other cartridges, when the entire project is done, just how close the numbers really are when you start to take into consideration modern-day bullet construction, modern-day velocities these cartridges can be pushed into, and the other parameters that are really important when selecting a caliber for hunting, which include the weight of the rifle, suppressed, unsuppressed, braked, unbraked, all of these other things, the ability to follow up, the ability to stay on target after the shot, your ability to shoot it well. So when we have all these parameters, which we'll lay out over the next couple of weeks on our YouTube channel, the final score that we're going to give that cartridge for a hunting cartridge when used in its parameters of how they really stack up against each other when they're in good shooters' hands.
I've never shot 6.5 by 55.
A 6.5 by 55 speed. Well,
because that's a killer cartridge. It should be in the mix, right?
Most popular hunting cartridge in Europe for a moose.
Yeah.
And yet we have to tell the public that, the 300 rum is, bare minimum. And we also just want to throw out there, I know everybody out there, is wise enough to know the game on the new cartridges every year being released. And there's a whole marketing theme to that. And so I'm always careful I like to let cartridges set for a long period of time to see if they've got feed underneath them. I can give you a list of cartridges of the last 20 years, and I'm sure y'all can too, of cartridges that didn't make it. The 7 short action Ultra Mag was the commercial darling, and then the 7 Winchester short mag and 300 Winchester short mag, and all these cartridges have came and went. I mean, some of them you can't even find ammunition from the factory for anymore.
Yeah.
20 years from now, you're going to be able to find brass for it. So, I'm a shooter first. And I don't say that as if, I'm saying my abilities. I'm saying that I love to shoot. I hunt because I love to shoot and eat things, but I enjoy the shooting part more. And so when I look at cartridges, I look at it from a shooter's perspective is, can I shoot it well? Do I enjoy shooting it? Am I going to train with it? How efficient can I be with it? And so that's sort of how I approach it, and I think that's a good way to look at these. And when maybe talking a little bit about how to deal with the guys out there that have the syndrome for the magnum-itis stuff, and not shaming people that can shoot the magnums well. There are those, but especially for new shooters and young shooters, oh my God, might not be the best choice if you want to keep your 17-year-old hunting with you for the next 3 years. You let him get walloped one time by a 300 Remington Ultra Mag and an 8-pound rifle, that kid's finding something else to do.
That's right.
Unless he's really trying to impress you for some reason and not enjoying himself doing it.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and there's limits, right? There's always limits.
I remember, last story I'll share with this, right? And then we'll talk about a couple updates. I remember I had it was a boyfriend girlfriend, but they were older. They were like in their maybe 40s.
You
right?
had a boyfriend girlfriend?
Yeah, well, not mine, but they were boyfriend girlfriend.
Okay, good.
They had come through the shooting school together, right?
Uh-huh.
They were awesome people. She had drawn a world-class tag. I guess it's like one of the coveted tags in Arizona or something like that. In this whatever state it was, but it's like a super coveted, like they only give out 7 a year, whatever it was. And they came through the shooting school to train up. And he had brought a custom-made 300 blown-out shoulder Weatherby. I mean, it wasn't a weather. It was like this crazy offset of a Weatherby. I mean, whoever chambered the rifle shouldn't have done it the way they did because the cartridge is so long. It was up in the smallest portion of the barrel, way ahead of where the shank goes 1/250, and it narrows down. I mean, it was cut way too short, and stainless steel can cause issues in that area. But so when they brought it, he was like, well, I'd like her to shoot this a little bit at the school. But she got the tag, by the way, and he bought her the rifle. So I was like, no way. We're going to get her on a 223. She never shot before, and we had her on a school gun. But he insisted at the end of day 3 that she get a couple shots through her hunting rifle. First shot through the gun, she was already in tears. Second shot through the gun, she had rolled up a coat between her and the rifle and was scared pulling the trigger. Yeah. And I looked at him. I'm like, she might be your girlfriend, but you keep this up,
she won't be for much longer.
No. And I was looking at him, and he's like, well, do you want to shoot it a little bit? And I'm like, no. You like it kicked, and I could see her tears well up almost instantly. Yeah. And so you have to take that into consideration when you start talking about elk cartridges for new shooters, for women, for young kids. And that affected me. The last thing I watched a father-daughter team when my daughter was getting ready to start hunting. Last story, I promise. And he bought her a 243 and an ultralight rifle. And they were fighting. Like the dad was all mad. She was all crying. She was scared of the rifle. And he made the mistake by putting 105 grain round tips in the gun in a 6-pound rifle. And it kicked. And I was like, I don't want to throw any names out there, but I pulled him off side. I'm like, hey, did you shoot that? He goes, no, why? Because I was trying to get the situation down. My daughter was there with us. Mm-hmm. And I was like, you got to shoot it. I said, do you realize that's kicking the shit out of her? And he goes, no, it's not. It's a 243. And I'm like, you bought 105 grain bullets in a 6.5 pound rifle. He shot it once and he was like, oh my God.
Yeah, it wasn't what he was expecting.
No. And he has his 13-year-old daughter, shooting it and almost in tears, afraid of the rifle.
Yeah.
And like a typical dad, he was like, well, you have to shoot it. This is the gun that I bought you. He could have bought 58 grain SSTs or something, super light that cut the recoil way down. And the rifle would have been a totally different rifle. But as a shooter and as someone who loves this stuff, and you start to see stuff like that, it leaves an imprint on you that people don't realize you're losing your future hunting partner.
That's right. Yeah, frightening them.
You are.
Yeah.
And they're never going to enjoy it. And so the first opportunity they get to bail on you, you're going to lose what could have been something that you might have enjoyed for the rest of your lives together. So I look at it from that way too. Before we continue on, I do want to say a quick thanks to our last sponsor. I do want to thank MDT, who's a proud sponsor of the show. World-class chassis coming out with the new JAE J. Allen 700. We have one coming here.
Oh, when's it coming?
A couple weeks we should have it. We're going to do some testing on it.
Just in time for Richard's Christmas.
Yeah. And then we have the ACC Elite coming. We'll be doing some testing on it as soon as it releases. So, and we just finished up an HNT 26.
Yeah, that was a nice rifle.
It's going out to Texas.
What was it? 9 pounds, 3 ounces, 9 pounds, 6 ounces, including the scope.
Which was a 7 by 30.
7 by 35. Loophole 5 HD.
A big scope.
Yes, big scope.
But what do you think the rifle weighed without the optics?
Oh, that's probably at least 1.5 pounds for that optic.
Yeah,
probably 1.75 pounds.
Yeah.
So you're
in
you're
the
down
sevens.
there in this high sevens, maybe
Yep.
Yeah.
So reasonable weight, 6.5 Creed, carbon, could be suppressed, a little bit heavier barrel on it, but it swings nice, it handles nice. It's a nice chassis.
That's a great combination, right? You've got, here we go back into the caliber conversation. 6.5 Creedmoor, quite a sweet shooting round, and you've got enough weight in the rifle that it's going to be very comfortable to shoot, and it's also light enough that it's going to be actually not a pain in the what's to carry around in the woods.
Yeah, there's a trade-off between upping the weight a little bit and controlling the recoil when some of the calibers, and it's a good combination all the way around.
And that customer's a hunter, so we know that thing's going in the woods, and we know it's going to be getting some blood on it pretty soon.
Oh yeah. If you go to our Facebook page, you'll see a pig that was shot with a 22 Creedmoor, and he is a believer in that cartridge. So if you go to Facebook, you'll see shot it in the head, 88 grain bullet, knocked us stuffing out. We have a couple deer that customers have submitted photos that we can't post. They're just so violent. My wife looked at the one picture and was like,
She's
my
what
God.
What is that?
Yeah, it's pretty violent. But
Gruesome
that's that
photos.
cavitation.
Yeah.
I mean, super high velocity and just does massive damage. So MDT, they make fantastic chassis. So if you want to upgrade your rifle, custom or otherwise, great place to start is in a fully adjustable stock, and the HNT 26 doesn't disappoint. So you can stop over at mdttac.com. That's mdttac.com today. So before we wrap it up, Richard, anything new and exciting or anything you want to talk about?
My Flemish bowstring is being delivered today for my self-build self-bow.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah. And I think we've got a hunting trip that we're sort of planning, and I'd like to shoot a hog with a self-made bow if I can.
And I don't want to throw any names out there. I believe he was on the Lone Show, but maybe we can invite him onto the podcast, talk about his hunting. He is a big hunter. So maybe we could reach out to him and see if he'd like to come on for an interview.
Sure.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, we should do that.
So I'm going to take a 22 Creed down. We're hoping to do some hunting trips soon and maybe do some pig hunting and really get a chance to get out with the caliber and stretch his legs out and have some fun with it. Test some of the different bullets, see what they can really do. So if you enjoy the podcast and you'd like to leave a review, we really appreciate it. It helps us be found across the board. And then also, if you know people that hunt and shoot, if you want to share it, we really appreciate that as well. You can also become one of our Patreons. You can stop over to patreon.com. If you'd like to be part of the team here, we certainly appreciate that as well. So look for the video coming up. We did a short video just talking a little bit about the Elk cartridges in the YouTube.
Yeah, and I think, the folks out there that watch that video, if you wanted to comment, it would be gratefully received, but focus more on how you feel you're being pushed into certain calibers rather than what you've actually chosen, and how, if you're a traditional guy and you chose one of the traditional calibers, or if you're one of the newer hunters and you picked one of the more modern calibers, like, how did you make that decision? That's the question that we're interested in. Were you swayed by advertising and the modern stuff, or are you more traditional, knowing, no, this is the old stuff. I'm going to use it because I know it's tried and tested and good.
That's a great way to put it. How you made your caliber
How you were
selection.
influenced.
That's a really great question. So we'll put that video up. It'll be active before the weekend. You can stop over and see that at Wolf Precision's YouTube channel.
Yeah, and maybe we'll talk about some of the comments. If we get some couple of good comments on that YouTube video, we'll talk about them in the podcast and try and dissect them from our point of view.
Oh, that's a great.
Doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It's just our point of view.
Right. And again, we're going to get into this video review of caliber selections and how we can come up with a scoring system to unbiasedly give a real rating to what these calibers truly can do when you take into consideration, how you're going to limit them and the distances, and for shooters to have the option to look at them.
Yeah, should be fun.
Very open-mindedly, too. Not super
Yeah.
opinionated.
Yep.
Objectively looked at.
Yep.
So thank you so much for taking the time to join us here. My name is Jamie Dodson.
And I'm Richard Jones.
And we'll see you guys in the next podcast. We're going to dissect a little bit more into some of the calibers and talk a little bit more about the Elk cartridges. So thanks so much for taking the time to join us at the show.